Welcome everybody, ladies and gentlemen, to the webinar Addressing Conflicting Goals in Water Management, New Tools for Improved Governance, where we would like to present today some of the innovative products that have been developed within the research initiative Water as a Global Resource, or GroW for short, that has been funded by the German Federal Ministry of Education and Research over the past 4 years. My name is Annika Kramer. I'm head of the water program at Adelphi, an independent think tank based in Berlin. And we have been leading the GroW networking and transfer project. And in this position, I am happy to be moderating this webinar today. We are pleased to welcome you all as participants to our webinar. I see some familiar faces from the GroW community. Good to see you all again. But we are especially happy to also have some representatives from water management practice and other researchers. Before we start, I would like to mention that this webinar will be recorded, as we would like to make the information available to those who did not have time to attend today. So if you do not wish to be seen, we would ask you to simply turn off your camera as long as speakers will give their presentations. We will stop the recording before the discussion part. Now let's take a quick look at the agenda for today's webinar. We will be starting with a keynote from a practitioner from the field, and we are very pleased that we could win Neil Macleod from South Africa for this. Neil has more than 50 years of experience in the water sector, and for more than 20 years has been the head of eThekwini, Water and Sanitation, that provides services to the Durban metropolitan area with more than 3 million customers. Since he retired in 2014, Neil has been consulting for South African and international organizations such as the World Bank. And we are looking forward to his keynote in a second. The keynote will be followed by the presentation of 3 selected GroW products. As you can see from the agenda, and we will introduce each of them in time. If time allows, you will have the chance to ask the speakers 1 or 2 questions for clarification after each presentation. But we have reserved time for the main discussion after the presentations, when we will open the floor for a broader discussion during the last half hour of this webinar. Now, before we get started, I would like to shortly mention some housekeeping rules, as you all are probably already very experienced. It's similar to other webinars. We would like to ask everyone to turn off their microphones apart from the speakers. But please feel free to turn on your video so that we can see who is participating. And it's also nice for the speakers not to talk to just to a black box. As the main discussion part is scheduled for the last half hour of the webinar, please feel free to post your comments or questions already during the presentations. Our moderation team will collect them and make sure that they will be taken up in the later discussion. So also that you don't forget the comments that you would wanted to make to any of the earlier presentations. To the speakers, as always, please keep an eye on the time for presentations, and so that we will have time for discussion later on. If in the follow-up to this webinar you have any questions or comments about this webinar, please reach out to us. You can reach us at grownet@adelphi.de, as you can see from the slide here. Another highlight that we would like to mention are the GroW technical brief that has also been sent out to you with the invitation to this webinar. In this technical brief, you will find a summary of the products that will be presented today and also of other GroW governance tools for sustainable water management. If you didn't have time to take a look before, please download the publication from either our website. You can also access it directly with the QR code that's shown on the slide here. And with this, I wish you and all of us an interesting event, and would like to hand over to our keynote speaker, Neil Macleod. Neil, the floor is yours, and we will share your slide.
Thanks, Annika. I can see it. I hope that everybody else can too. I'm not driving my slides because I'm living in South Africa and most of you are in Europe. This is the title I was asked to speak on, and it's focusing on South Africa and the South African sector. But I guess there are lessons that we've learned and are still learning that are applicable across the world, and particularly in developing countries. So if you go to the next slide, there is some context which describes, and I apologize for all the words, but the institutional arrangements in our country are rather confusing at the moment, and they've grown over the last 25 years as the new South Africa has unfolded. And so there are gaps in our institutional arrangement and there are overlaps. And so we have problems, as I've listed here, the Ministry of Water and Sanitation being a player and a regulator or a referee. The ministry has responsibility for the large dams and who can take water from where, and when you put it back into the river, what quality it has to be. But the minister also has water boards under his management, which were originally intended to provide bulk water to regions, but now are competing with municipalities. And the reason for that is that the municipalities who have the authority to provide water, there are 144 of them, are not doing well. I'll show you a picture just now. And so the mandate of the water boards has been expanded. And now you have this conflict between government, the government's agencies, and the municipalities about who decides what and who supplies water to who, and who treats the sewage, and when things go wrong, who's responsible. So there is a lot of conflict that's developed and a lot of people falling through the net, so to speak, and not receiving services, and the environmental quality degrading because of these gaps. The other complicating factor is that one minister decides who is an authority, who can provide water at the municipal level, and another minister, the Water Affairs Minister, decides what to do with his own organizations. So there was a survey done in 2018 where the municipalities, or water service authorities, were asked to rate themselves against 18 criteria. And the picture that came out of that was not good. There is also nobody regulating the sector from an economic point of view. And there used to be somebody regulating it from a service quality point of view. But when the results got so bad, those two initiatives were stopped in 2014. The final context thing I wanted to talk about is this recognition that we have that if we're going to rationalize the number of authorities, you move the head office and the places where people can go to see the top management further and further away from the customers. And so when you're trying to create efficient, viable institutions and balance them with the need for access and responsiveness, there's a tension. So the next slide is a picture which has an interesting story. This is South Africa. And this is the results of that survey in 2018, where the municipal water authorities, here the 144 of them, were asked to rate themselves against these 18 criteria. And the red and the orange ones, and there are two gray ones in the middle there, are in a terrible state. They regard themselves as extremely or highly vulnerable, basically not being able to meet their obligations in terms of managing water use and even managing water supply. The other interesting thing is if you look down in the bottom left where it says Cape Town, this was done in 2018. And in 2019 and 2020, Cape Town faced the worst drought in recorded history, and in fact had to cut its water use amount from what it was in 2018 by half. So it was using 1,200 megaliters a day in 2018, and by the end of 2019, early 2020, it was down to under 600 megaliters a day. It actually won an award from the International Water Association for its efforts, but it shows you that even a place like Cape Town, which is very well run, very well managed, which is a viable institution, can have things change literally in a year. Right, next slide, please. So what are we going to do about the institutional things? The minister called a summit 2 weeks ago, the Minister of Water Affairs, to say, we have a problem. What are we going to do? And these are the key messages that I took away from that summit, which now are being left to a task team to actually work on and bring about change. The regulation side of things needs to be brought back. the number of water services authorities, the number of municipalities providing water and sanitation services needs to be reduced and rationalized. The fact that we have duplicate ministries managing the system needs to be addressed. And the aim should be to create responsive, viable institutions that can manage the demand, that can match the water use to the available water, and that can meet customers' needs. And just as an aside, South Africa is in the bottom 35 of countries in the world when it comes to water scarcity. So we are almost, for most of our country, in a desert situation, where our rainfall is something like 450 millimeters a year, and the international average is over 800. So a big problem. I need to move on to keep to my 10 minutes. The next slide, please. So now I'm going to move to the water use issues. So here's the challenge in a nutshell. Demand management at the municipal level is not working well. Non-revenue water, the difference between water that's put into service and the water that generates revenue, 40% of that water is not generating revenue. And the per capita consumption, if you divide the total consumption in the area by the number of people living there, we're running at 237 liters per person per day. We should be down about 170. We also have a problem of water quality because of the fact that there's been rapid urbanization in South Africa since the new South Africa began in 1996. People have moved from rural areas to urban areas, and that urbanization has resulted in the creation of shack settlements or slums. We call them informal settlements, where the services are still trying to catch up with the rate of movement of people. And so you have non-point source runoff, also from bad farming practices, the fact that people have drained wetlands and planted forests and plowed up the grasslands and replaced them with croplands. That has all contributed to pollution of our rivers. And the fact, as you can see in the next point, of the more than 1,000 sewage treatment plants, only 135 were actually seen as performing at an acceptable level. And that in itself creates problems of its own. So the problem is not getting better because the number of informal settlements literally grows by the day. Last slide, please. So just some points which link to the tools that you're going to hear about after I finish. The message that I've learned from my many years in this sector is that communication lies behind success. In fact, I've used this saying for many, many years, that secrecy is the enemy of good governance. If you don't communicate well to the policymakers, and if you don't communicate well to your customers, then you're in for trouble. And in fact, the cost of business goes up because people don't understand what their rights and responsibilities are, and you have to spend a lot of time dealing with what we now today know as fake news. And we also learned that communication is a two-way process. It's not us telling our customers what they need to do. And so we segmented the market and created focus groups for different sectors of the market and user platforms, and went on radio, go on radio, doing question and answer talk shows so that people can express their concerns and we can respond to them. The inefficiencies at a municipal level mean better management. And a problem that is not unique to South Africa is that the policymakers, those providing oversight, and the executive, those people actually implementing the policies, in many areas have got too close together. And so there isn't this oversight that drives the executive to actually deliver and manage the water use effectively and manage the water quality issues effectively. And if I go back to the Cape Town example, in their drought, there was huge competition between the farmers, between those growing the grapes and the maize and the wheat and the fruit, and the cities for that scarce amount of water. And also the farmers, as I say, their land use practices damage the quality of the catchment. There are some catchment management bodies created in South Africa, but not enough. And so that competition and how do you allocate the water and how do you manage the process is something that you're going to hear more about when others talk after me. We've also realized that to build resilient systems, we need to turn away from just using surface water and groundwater and look at recycling, another communication challenge, because people think that recycled water is unsafe and bad, and using that to recharge aquifers, to take rainwater off roofs when the birds have sat there and dropped their droppings on it. All these issues concern customers and need to be addressed. And finally, we need to price water correctly. And again, the political interference and the governance issues mean that it's difficult to penalize people when they use water excessively. It's difficult to set tariffs to the right level so that poor families can access the water, but equally those that waste and use water excessively can be brought under control. So that's the context of what you're going to hear today. How do we allocate this resource? How do we manage these use issues? How do we deal with the competitions that exist in our sector? That's me done. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Neil, for sharing your valuable insights from a very practical perspective, showing how the challenges that water utilities face, and from the example of South Africa, but definitely transferable to many other regions in the world, and how these call for better communication and coordination among the various actors involved in water management and also as water users. Thanks a lot. I think that perfectly sets the scene for the next presentations. And I would now like to hand over to our next speaker, Dr. Hannah Kosow, who is Research Associate at the Center for Interdisciplinary Risk and Innovation Studies. She was a research partner in the project Trust and will now speak about designing policy mixes for coherent water governance. Hannah, the screen is yours.
Thanks a lot, Annika. So I have the pleasure to talk about the interdisciplinary methodology that we developed in the Trust project. It combines qualitative systems analysis with public policy analysis, so with political science. I try not to be too technical, as you can look up the technical details in our publications, but rather to show what type of information the methodology provides to analysts, planners, administrators, stakeholders, and even policymakers. So let's start with goal conflicts in water resource management. On the one hand, we have goal conflicts within the water sector. There are conflicts between short-term and long-term goals. Upper and lower riparians have different goals. We have competitive use by domestic consumption, agriculture, hydropower, industry, tourism, and ecosystems, etc. And there are also goal conflicts between quantity-related and quality-related goals. And we have also goal conflicts between different levels of governance, as we just heard. So, and then things get even more complicated when we consider goal conflicts between the water sector and other sectors. Neil just pointed at the link to the land use, and another example is the water, energy, food nexus. So goal conflicts are next to uncertainty and complexity, typical characteristics of wicked problems and of sustainability transformations in general. And this is currently most prominently discussed regarding the UN Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, and their synergies and trade-offs. And this discussion is linked to the question how to come to a coherent governance for sustainable development. This for the context. So one approach towards a more sustainable governance is policy design. This means to address goal conflicts on the level of policies. Policies understood as strategies, instruments, and measures to reach an objective. The advantage to focus on the level of policies is that we go to the level of action. And furthermore, one can even share a goal, but be in conflict about the right policy to achieve it. And there are policies that address more than one goal at the same time. So regarding policy design, free combination of individual policies is difficult because individual effective policies often hinder each other in their effectiveness. So instead, we need to consider the interplay of policies and their intended and unintended side effects within and between sectors, and also between new and old policies. So the question that we asked ourselves on the Trust project was how to design policy mixes for water resource management in the Lurine River catchment that address the multiple goals of different water users, avoid trade-offs, and maximize synergies. Just to give you a tiny bit of context, Lurine is the smallest of the 3 rivers providing the desert city of Lima and its 10 million inhabitants with water. So what we did is that we transferred a semi-qualitative form of systems analysis, so a type of conceptual modeling, to the realm of policy design. It's cross-impact balances. It originally comes from the field of scenario analysis. And I do my best to give you a very rough idea. You see here a very simplified small CIB matrix. The system elements are defined as objectives, so different water resource related objectives, as for example, safely treat and dispose of industrial wastewaters. Then the alternative states are alternative policies to reach these objectives. For example, different solutions to wastewater treatment and disposal. And then we need to have the assessment of interactions between policies. And altogether, these assessments form an impact network. CIB now comes with a specific balance algorithm that allows to analyze such impact networks and to identify so-called Nash equilibria of the impact network. These are understood in our application as policy mixes. That means combinations of one policy per objective. And finally, the method comes with measurements to assess to what degree policy mixes are synergetic and consistent. And when we add active and passive elements to this interaction network, we can also see how sustainable and how robust policy mixes are. Here you see a policy interaction model that we have built in the Trust project. The matrix contains 14 objectives of different water user groups: households, agriculture, industry, ecosystems, etc. These are water quality and water quantity related objectives in the upper catchment and in the lower catchment of the Lurine. For each objective, 2 to 5 policy alternatives have been identified. So this model, this matrix, comprises in total 47 policies. Then, during interviews with experts and stakeholders, we asked, is there an impact of policy A on the effectiveness of policy B? If yes, is it a fostering or a hindering impact, and how strong is it? And the results, you can see them in the green and red cells in this matrix. We also added SDG targets as passive criteria into the matrix, and contexts as active factors. Here, it's governance frameworks. And very important, behind this matrix, we also stored the verbal justifications for the impact assessments. So the first thing one can do with such a matrix is to analyze the status quo policy mix. And CIB shows where and to what degree the policies in the mix are consistent or inconsistent. Consistency tells us whether objectives of a policy mix are in an optimal state or not. And as you can easily see, the current policy mix is not consistent. Most policies are inconsistent. That means in contradiction to each other. And when we then look at the hindering interrelations and the verbal explications behind, we see very classical water use conflicts regarding water quantity and water quality. We have competitive use of surface and groundwater by different users, and we have insufficient treatment and or insecure disposal of domestic and industrial wastewaters, which again threatens then the quality of surface and groundwaters. That's the first thing one can do. But then the approach also allows to design new mixes. That means select, in our case, 14 policies out of the 47 that are able to reach the 14 objectives at the same time. And the matrix that I've shown you results in almost 6 million theoretically possible combinations or mixes, but of course, not all of these make any sense. You see here that they strongly vary in how synergetic they are. That means how well a mix benefits from supportive policy interactions and how effective it is. But this is just the first information we get. The second information is the mix consistent? So what mix is stable? Because it optimizes each of its objectives and avoids inner contradictions. And I can tell you that all of these consistent solutions share that safe wastewater treatment and disposal is key. And from there, various mixes are possible and consistent. So we have then selected 6 most diverse policy mixes, and we'll use these now to show how our methodology supports sustainability assessment too. When sustainability criteria are included in the policy interaction matrix, the alternative mixes can also be evaluated on how well they achieve different sustainability goals. In this case, how well do the consistent mixes, the green ones, perform when it comes to providing people with water, SDG target 6.1, or protecting water-related ecosystems, target 6.6. And you see they contribute to these targets in different degrees, and all way better than the status quo, which is clearly harming target 6.6. Then the criteria can also be combined into an index, of course, when you use more than these 2. This is what we do on the next slide. Here you see the consistent mixes plotted according to their sustainability index and according to their synergy index. And in green, you see the mixes that are consistent, assuming that the overall governance in Lorraine does not change. And in red and blue, those mixes, you can see those mixes that are consistent assume that we have improved governance. The red ones, an improved authority, better enforcement and sanctioning power of authorities, or improved consultation, better cooperation among actors, and enhanced conflict resolution capacity. So finally, robust are those mixes marked by those little tiny yellow dots, which are consistent under different context assumptions. All right, I'm almost at the end. Just to give you a very brief impression of our application in Lorraine, including expert and stakeholder consultation and information in form of workshops and interviews. And we can come back to this empirical design later in the discussion if you like. So to sum up, considering policies individually ignores their interactions, but these interactions can strongly impact their effectiveness. So we recommend to consider policy interactions and policy mixes instead. And at this aim, we have developed a methodology to analyze and evaluate policy mixes through policy interaction modeling. And we believe that this is a tool that can be used on different levels for research, consultancy, but also for planners and administrators. Its base is the cross-impact balances, the qualitative systems analysis. It provides very easy operationalizations of synergy and of consistency. In addition, it allows to assess sustainability effects and the robustness of policy mixes. And it does one thing, it explicitly addresses goal conflicts. So it reveals them with goal conflicts within the water sector and between sectors. So we hope that this approach could be one element towards a more coherent and more sustainable water resource governance. Thank you very much for your attention. And I would like to thank also the team that is behind this work, Christian Leon, Fabienne Min, Wolfgang Weimer-Jehle, and point you at our free software, which you can download from this webpage. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hannah, for presenting these tools. And I think it became quite obvious how this could help to address some of the challenges that Neil has mentioned, looking, for example, at authorities and the different roles of authorities and how different governance approaches to address this can be selected. Yeah, thanks a lot. We have a few minutes for if there's any immediate question for clarification. Apart from that, if it's not immediate for clarification, I would like to keep the other questions for discussion at the end. But if there's anything specific, please feel free to write into the chat or raise your hand now. I also see that there has already been a question to Neil. Thanks a lot, and also for already answering that. You can continue to put questions in the chat, and we can take them up later, or if this presenter feels there's an easy answer to that can be provided in the chat, that's also fine. Yeah, but any further questions, put them in the chat and we'll take them up. Okay, as I see there's no immediate question. Okay, now I see there's questions coming up. I need to make sure I can get them. Is there anything we need to address now, or can we take them up later? Yeah, I think we will take them up later, and then thanks for putting the questions. We keep them on mind. I would now like to hand over to our next speaker, Hannah Schomberg, Research Associate at the University of Kassel, who will speak about countering problem shifting through comprehensive environmental assessment, another tool developed within the GroW project. And this time the GroW project WANDEL.
Thank you very much for the introduction. Hi everybody from the middle of Germany. I'm located some kilometers south of Kassel. I hope that everyone can see my screen, but I think it's working. Yeah, as Annika already said, I'm with the Center for Environmental Systems Research, and we have been part of the GroW initiative in the project WANDEL. And our work was not so much related to governance. That was more the part of, or more the duty of other partners in the project. But we developed a tool that can, in my opinion, very good be used for governance as a first step, so to say. And the tool we developed is about countering problem shifting through a comprehensive environmental assessment. And I want to show you a little bit about this tool. So, what is the background of the WANDEL project? Well, WANDEL is water resources as important factor in the energy transition at local and global scale. So it's very much about the energy transition and the interaction of the SDGs 6 and 7. And on the left side, you see a small map from the work of Flörke et al. In 2014. And they found that there may be a global cooling water deficit from electricity generation of 100 square kilometers in 2050, which is really huge. And therefore, the question for the main question for the WANDEL project was, what could be the effect of water availability for power generation systems on the global energy transition? And a method to answer this question was the comparison of 4 case studies in the project. You see them on the right side. We had run-of-river hydropower in Germany at the Danube, concentrated solar power in Morocco, the burning of sugarcane residues in Brazil, and finally, finally the combustion of coal, a coal-fired power plant in Germany as a reference, so to say. But very at the beginning of the project, we found that water availability is or cannot be the only question. And in the small map, you now see a possible problem, for example, for the case study burning of sugarcane residues, because this case study relies on fertilizer, which may originate from all over the world. And so the impacts of this case study are not only limited to the place of the case study itself, but also can be all around the world. For example, in Australia, if the potash is originating from there, just a small example. And therefore, we somehow widened our target question. And what I wanted to find out is, how can the system-wide environmental performance of human activities be assessed comprehensively? And how is the environmental performance of our case studies? Our method was life cycle impact assessment with a spatial differentiation of the upstream supply. On the right side, you see our case studies and our LCA models and the locations of the case studies. I don't want to go into the details, but just that you see that we consider the complete supply chain, not only the case study itself. I'm sorry. So, what was part of the life cycle assessment? Well, we used the findings of the work of Steinmann from 2014, who found that the fossil energy, the material, land, and water footprint comprise 84% of the variance of environmental impacts. So it was a good idea from our point of view to use these footprints for the assessment. And we also added the climate footprint and human health and ecosystem quality indicators. These are endpoint indicators for those of you who are familiar with life cycle impact assessment, which means that the footprints are pressure indicators and the endpoint indicators are impact indicators. So they are wider from the place of the impact, but that goes too much into the details of life cycle impact assessment. The second thing that we added was a hotspot analysis where we normalized the results of our case studies, defined threshold values for hotspots, and identified hotspots spatially and activity-wise. And as our tool was based on the German environmental impact assessment, which is required before a building or a plant can be built in Germany, we called this tool environmental sustainability assessment. And the upper part are the footprints that I have shown you on the slides before. And the part below is a verbally argumentative assessment, which we included here as we found in the development of the tool that practitioners may have problems with this pure life cycle impact assessment thing, which comes from science, as they are used to these verbally argumentative kind of describing case studies. But both can be very good combined and then used to spatially localize impacts and to identify the kind of activities that are important for the hotspots, for example, mining activities. So this is our tool, and in the remaining time, I want to show you some examples, some results, and tell you a little bit how I think this can be included into governance structures. Yeah, some general findings from our case studies are that the highest environmental pressures are most often associated with the burning of coal, which is good because this is what we are aiming at with the energy transition on the global level or even on country level. And on the right side, you now see some bar charts which illustrate that we have 6 footprints here, and the results of the CPP of the coal power plant are highest in 4 of these footprints. The concentrated solar power provides only minor savings compared to the coal-fired power, which is a new finding, and I think which is very important. You see this here in the small arrows. The run-of-river hydropower case study most often provides the greatest savings. This is also something which is very good. And so I'm sorry. And we have also some findings from single pressures that contradict these general findings. So land occupation, and I have to mention here that we only looked into the land occupation, the pure physical one, because the existing methods for assessing the land footprint are not sophisticated enough yet for these purposes. So the pure physical land occupation of the concentrated solar power plant and the Bagasse case studies equals the CPP. And this is something which may become a major problem in the future, especially if especially if these technologies are expanded. And you might know that there are plans, for example, from the Moroccan government to expand the technology with the purpose to export energy also to Europe. And very interesting, especially for this meeting today, the water scarcity footprint of the renewable electricity case studies is in most cases higher than the water scarcity footprint of the of the CPP of the coal-fired power plant. And this is really something which is a problem, and this problem may even increase in the future with climate change and increasing water scarcity. Looking at the global level, these are now the results of the hotspot analysis, so the second part of our tool. You see some maps here where we located the impacts, and you see that there is a great difference in the construction and the operation phases. So this is also something which is important to know. Many hotspots are due to the construction of the run-of-river hydropower and the concentrated solar power. And this is something that is important because in the slide before we saw that the raw hydropower is most often responsible for the greatest savings, but also it is responsible for hotspots all around the world. Another finding is that the most severe hotspots are due to the coal-fired power plant in Russia. These are the coal mines where the coal-fired power plant gets its coal from. And to sum our findings up, you know, we had the focus on the global energy transition. There should be an acceleration of the coal phase out, which is, I think, clear to every one of us. Looking at the renewable electricity generation, there is no clear favorite. All technologies have impacts, and it's really important to look into the details to answer the question, which technology is suitable where on the earth? And the concentrated solar power must be viewed critically because of its high material demand, high land requirements, and high water requirements. And there should always be a spatially explicit environmental sustainability assessment of the supply chain, as it can help to identify problem shifting. And I think this is very important as a governance tool in combination with, for example, what Hannah Kosow just presented to us, or with this in mind, what we heard from Mr. Macleod, because if a technology which has high impacts, for example, in the Moroccan desert, meets a situation where we have, for example, a poor water management system or something like that, it can really lead to problem shifting. And if we really want to make the global energy transition sustainable, we need to consider these things. And our tool can be transferred to different questions and, of course, to any kind of case study at different levels, which makes it, in my opinion, suitable for answering these questions of problem shifting. And with this, I want to close my presentation. Thank you very much for your attention, and I am happy to receive your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anna, for this presentation. And I think it's really interesting to also see a tool that can actually provide assessment and provide the information that can then serve as a basis for designing policies and assessing the synergies then in implementation. So thanks a lot. Are there any immediate questions to this tool for clarification that we should take up now while it's still fresh, or if is there, in addition to the broader discussion that we'll have later on? I see there's no immediate questions. Then we can move on to the next presentation, and we are perfectly in time. So that's good. We'll have a lot of time for discussion later on. So keep on putting your questions in the chat. I would like to now hand over to our next speaker, Dr. Ulf Stein, Senior Fellow and Coordinator of Water Studies at Ecologic Institute, also based in Berlin, who will speak about the diagnostic water governance tool that has been developed within the STEER project. Ulf, the screen is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much. So now you should see my presentation. Yeah, okay. Yeah, hello everyone. Now we heard so much of water and governance related challenges, I would like to give you a short impression of our work in the STEER project. We developed a diagnostic water governance tool. What we heard from our previous speakers is that, that decision makers in catchments very often facing water-related challenges, such as, for instance, fragmentation or overlapping competencies. In many of those cases, the search for solutions to water management challenges involves strengthening coordination and cooperation between different actors, also between different sectors, for instance, agriculture, forestry, land use, and others. So what we have developed in this diagnostic water governance tool is that we really try to support water government practitioners and scientists in their decision-making process. And as this tool is an online tool, we would like to show you now a short video that shows you how this tool works in action. So we invite you now to look together a short teaser video. Maybe someone of Adelphi can share this video.
Ensuring the sustainable management of water resources is one of the key challenges of our times.
No,
in the light of dwindling water
you
resources.
can stop sharing.
Ah, yeah.
Okay, and then we start again.
Super.
Ensuring the sustainable management of water resources is one of the key challenges of our times. In the light of dwindling water reserves, more frequent water extreme events, and ongoing pollution of water resources, researchers are pointing to the importance of sound and effective water governance. Across the world, many approaches and instruments have been applied to remedy water management problems. Although numerous approaches exist, practitioners in a river basin often miss a central repository in which to find governance recommendations that are specifically developed for the concrete water management challenge they are facing. Researchers from the STEER project designed the diagnostic water governance tool to assist water management practitioners in solving the individual water management challenges in their regions, using a two-step logic. First, the tool provides a diagnosis on the state of the current water governance system based on data entered by the user. Second, the tool makes tailor-made recommendations for instruments that can contribute to improve the identified shortcomings. Once you signed up with your email address for the tool, you can choose between 3 different modes to enter data: the fast, the advanced, and the research track. The fast track needs less time to complete, but the diagnosis and therapy steps are less detailed than in the other 2 modes. The most complex mode is the research track, which is aimed at water governance experts that are also interested in contributing to future research by providing in-depth information about their governance system. After mode selection, you'll have to answer questions about your case study. These refer to diverse aspects such as main water management challenges or the degree of decentralization in your case study area. Once you have finished entering the data, you will receive a diagnosis on the state of your water governance system. This diagnosis has been calculated based on the entered data and uses an algorithm which takes into account key variables of your water governance system. It has been developed by water governance experts and is grounded on the empirical results of the STEER research project. In addition, the diagnosis provides information on several context variables that might influence the performance of your water governance system. You can also compare your case to other cases that have a similar scoring of key variables. A fact sheet for each of these case studies provides more detailed information about them. The case studies shown here have been analyzed as part of the STEER research project. In the therapy section, you will find tailor-made recommendations for your case study with instruments that can contribute to improving your water governance system. The instruments are ranked based on the algorithm of the tool. By selecting filters, you can narrow down the list of proposed tools to specific questions of your case study. By clicking on an instrument, you can get more information about it and find examples for its application in practice. The tool also allows you to enter data for several case studies. You can view and edit the data entered and access the diagnostic and therapy sections for each case study. Research shows that coordination and cooperation are key factors for the success of water management. By providing a case-specific diagnosis and tailor-made suggestions for coordination instruments, we hope that you will get inspired to enhance water governance in your basin or region with a fresh look.
Okay, thank you. Now we switch back to the presentation. Yeah. So now that you have had a look at the toolbox and how it works, very often we receive questions. Why did you develop another governance toolbox? There are already so many out there, and you can see in the lower part there is a short summary of different internationally used toolboxes that have different aims and also different target audiences. So the question is, why do we need that? So we think that despite of the theoretical advances in water governance research, implementation of, let's say, innovative water governance solutions in river basin are really hard to find. Especially if you look at solutions that really help water managers on the ground. And we think that this is due to the fact that there are some tools that are purely descriptive, offer a no or only context specific explanatory models. Other tools that have been developed as general patent recipes, they really don't show this kind of diagnostic approach that we are following. So what is missing are governance tools that connect the diagnosis of a certain regime, a governance regime in a certain region with possible solutions and strategies that are really applicable. So what are the user groups that this tool is intended for? We have made a selection of user groups, and you see them here. So it's mainly targeted actually at all actors at regional level, for instance, water associations, upper and lower water authorities, river basin administrations. In some, especially smaller countries, it could be also national authorities, environmental agencies and ministries. Last but not least, we also hope that this tool is helpful for scientists. Here, I think all the functionality around uploading case studies and testing them against other case studies is a very interesting feature. There, of course, are also other user groups that might be relevant. UN, World Bank is doing a lot in water governance analysis, especially also related to SDG 6, but also practitioners or consultants. But we think the learning aspect of the tool is the one that makes this tool more appropriate for those who are just starting to learn about what governance means and how you can improve it. So we already heard that the governance tool follows a diagnosis therapy learning approach. So first you start really with filling in data. You have seen this, you can see what kind of user group you're from. You select your track, either you want to go really in depth with the advanced track mode or the research track mode, or you just play around and test, which is also fine. And all the data entry actually works via an questionnaire, and it's designed to be very simple. So in case you just want to test around, you only have to answer a couple of questions and you already can move on. So generally it takes 30 to 60 minutes to fill out this questionnaire, depending on what you're aiming at. What is also important, it's not just the governance regime that defines the selection of the instruments. It's also important what kind of challenges are really the most pressing ones in your catchment. You can imagine that instruments to tackle water scarcity and drought are different from instruments that are suited, for instance, to improve water quality or water quantity problems. So in the next steps, you really get two things: the scoring of variables. We see later on what that means, and also an indication where coordination deficits can be identified on the basis of the data that have been entered. And then you move on to actually the result, or what we call the therapy section. Here we use a coordination instrument database that in a way makes suggestion what instruments are well suited, and you also get an impression on where those instruments are already implemented. So actually it also helps your fantasy what can be implemented and what helped in similar context. So the whole thing is really set up as a tool that supports you in learning about governance and your specific governance settings. So this is actually the governance framework that we have used, and you see it's a lot of variables here, more than 50 variables that define processes like the planning process, the implementation process, but also processes related to ecosystem services and interactions. You don't have to look into it. I just want to show you what the theoretical background is, and we melted this down down to 12 most important variables that you can see here in this sector diagrams, and you get a very nice visualization actually about your catchment and the different variables. On the left-hand side, for instance, you see the EMSHA catchment, which is known as a system that works very well, where they really tackle the transition from a former industrial coal mine region into modern approaches to water governance, also using very innovative instruments nowadays. But there's also a very interesting governance settings that you can explore when you read literature from the STEER research project. On the right-hand side, for instance, you see catchment in Guadalquivir, and you see that some of the sectors are rather small. One example here, for instance, that here we have some issues with different or competing competencies of administration. So there are some governance settings that really need to be tackled in the future. Okay, so this is now the therapy section. You can find a ranking of instruments based on the potential contribution of improving coordination. And how does this work? Well, an algorithm calculates an overall score that indicates the potential contribution of each instrument to improving the coordination of the governance system. This is based on individual variable specific instrument ratings that we have done internally within the STEER project team. The instrument rating indicates the extent to which a particular instrument can lead to an improvement of the independent variables. For instance, what instrument is well suited to improve governance settings that are not in an optimal state. A comparison to the entire instrument database thus results in an overall ranking for all instruments, indicating which instruments can contribute to increasing coordination and cooperation, and to what extent. Users are shown a ranking of the instruments, and what you can see in the lower part of this slide are the different filters. And I think the filters are really relevant because when you think of a river basin, for instance, in let's say South America, very often they don't have financial capacity or human capacity in authorities to really improve their governance settings. So you can really filter here for those instruments that are specifically fitting those specific settings. Yeah, the video already showed what you can find in our instrument database, and so you have these fact sheets on the instruments and the case studies. You compare different case studies, and user feedback shows that this is a very powerful tool for practitioners on the ground. So this is actually, that brings me to the end of my presentation. So we really think that the diagnostic water governance toolbox can help water management worldwide to analyze governance settings and to implement fitting governance innovations. And I'm happy to answer the questions that you may have. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Ulf, for this presentation and giving a detailed insight into the tool.